What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be going over the best Barbarian build for beginners for Diablo 4. This is going to be an excellent video if maybe you have never played Diablo before, or it's going to be an excellent video if maybe you have a sibling or like a little bro or sis that wants to play Diablo with you, maybe a significant other. You want them to be able to play a character that is not only really easy to actually play, but it's very forgiving in the defensive department, and they're going to actually help you so you can carry them even harder. And it's actually going to be great for group play as well, as there's going to be lots of shouts. So as you guys have seen from the gameplay, you get a lot of your damage by simply just existing. You can see most of the enemies, especially the trash enemies in the game, all you need to do is hold still, and what we're doing is called Thorns damage. You can see I'm not even doing anything. The enemies are just simply dying by them attacking into us and applying Thorns. So that's basically how the build works. Now, in addition to Thorns damage, we are actually going to be able to deal damage ourselves with Bleed, because Bleed and Thorns kind of coexist with each other. They have some synergy. So let's go over the skill tree, and then we'll also go over like the different pieces of gear that you're kind of looking forward to getting when you're playing the game. And so let's get started with the skills. So on our skill bar, there's a lot of variation, so keep in mind you can mix and match what you want, but for the most part, you're going to need to scale Bleed as well as Thorns. So at the very beginning, we're going to pick up Flay, and we're going to be able to get Enhanced Flay with the next skill, and then third skill point, we want Combat Flay. The reason why you want this is it's going to give you flat Thorns damage. This can stack up to 4 times, so ideally, you see where I have it bound to Q here, you want that to be at 4 at all times, because you're going to deal more damage based on the amount of Thorns damage that you're going to be able to acquire. Next up, after putting the 3 points over here, usually with Diablo builds, you get a core skill after putting 2 points in, but you do definitely want this Combat Flay. That's going to give you Thorns, and that stacks. And then next up, you can opt to go for Whirlwind, or you can go for Rend. Both of these are actually great options, as Whirlwind, how it works is when you gain extra core skill damage. The reason why Whirlwind is actually really strong is because you only need to cast Whirlwind once to get the full bonus from the damage bonus of your next core skill activating, versus if you do Rend, you're going to activate Rend, it's going to expend all of your core bonus damage, and then it would reset because you're already activated. But since Whirlwind is a channeled ability, you can expend all your resource, then go back to Flay, build it right back up, and get your damage that way. So either one is good. I think most people will enjoy playing Whirlwind because it's kind of the go-to build for a lot of people. They like to do the spin to win sort of a build, and it's kind of a fan favorite in the Diablo series, which is Whirlwind. Next up over here though, so 3 points here first, then we can put 2 points over here. Optionally, you can put it into Fierce Whirlwind. This one over here, lucky hit to apply vulnerability. You can get this later. Any of the circle passes, with the exception of the flat Thorns one, get those when you want to. And I say when you want to because this is one thing I really wanted to factor in with a lot of build guides with Diablo 4 going forward, is there are going to be items that drop that will say +1 to, you know, Rallying Cry. You only really need 1 point into Rallying Cry for a while. Later, you can get more points into it. But the most important thing with this build is actually just rushing straight down to Outburst. Outburst is going to give you flat Thorns damage and bonus Thorns damage for every 50 bonus maximum life you have. So the more HP that you have, the more damage you're going to be actually dealing with Thorns. And then on top of that, there's another one called Tough as Nails, which increases your Thorns damage by a small percent. It only, at 3 points, it only gives you 9%, which is actually small. But put 1 point into it ASAP, because your enemies will be taking Thorns damage as bleed damage over 5 seconds. Applying that bleed will actually be a huge benefit, because you're going to actually apply a slow when something is bleeding, and this is going to help your entire party do more damage if they have any bonus damage against crowd-controlled enemies. So that's what you're going to be mainly focusing in on. Another really important thing to hit earlier on is Challenging Shout, and make sure you get the Strategic Challenging Shout. So as you progress, rush Outburst. Then you can go ahead and put some points into getting Strategic Challenging Shout, and then you can put in a point into Rallying Cry. You don't feel like you have to get any of these, but there are going to be some times where it'll give you just 1 point to Rallying Cry. At that point, you could just opt to go for more HP if you want to, because more HP equals more damage anyway, so I'll give you guys some flexibility with that. This is the only important thing with this entire build that you need to rush. Get Outburst and 1 point to Toughest Nails. The rest is kind of up to you. If you want to play with Leap, feel free to go ahead and do so. But Warcry is excellent. It's just going to give you extra damage. And then on top of that, you can also make it so it grants you Berserking, which is going to give you extra damage. And then on top of that, you can get base extra life as fortification. This is kind of the same thing with our Rallying Cry, just going to give you extra fortification, which basically is the overhealth that you're seeing over on our character in the gameplay here. But if you want to, feel free to take charge, feel free to take leap if you don't like the shouts. But if you want to be really good for your party. Again, the whole idea with this build guide is good for beginners because it's going to help your entire party. You can also think about getting a raid leader earlier on, as it's going to be able to heal your entire party, including yourself, for the duration of any shouts. So just keep up your shouts. You can basically kind of spam them. There's not really a huge thing where you need to upkeep 100% uptime berserking, which in theory the best barbarian builds will be able to have 100% uptime with berserking. You have to rotate things. You're going to have to wait for these numbers to match up, and it's a lot more complex. Barbarian actually is a pretty hard class for beginners, unless you're playing this build. This build, Thorns, super easy. Just take damage and you'll deal damage. And on top of that, you're going to have a lot of fortification. So next up, we're going to be taking swiftness just so we can get some extra movement speed, because we want to be up in the front of the battle. And it just kind of helps to make the game feel a little bit better, as Diablo 4 is a very large game. So there's a lot of time spent just running around. Next up, there's a few different passives here. So the important passive, you want to put at least 1 point into hamstring. This is going to make it so your bleed applies a slow. This next one just gives you extra damage for bleed effects to have increased damage to vulnerable enemies. You have 2 sources of vulnerability with Flay, as well as your core skill, Whirlwind, is also going to apply vulnerability with the lucky hit chance. So putting some points in this, excellent. Again, these don't have to be rushed. There's no particular order that you need anything other than the flat thorns. Then getting thick skin is good. If you need more survivability, get thick skin. It's going to make it so you're going to be able to grant yourself damage reduction by getting fortified, as well as the defensive stance, making it so the damage reduction gained while you are fortified is by an additional 6%. So that's really great. As far as our ultimate ability, Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients and Iron Maelstrom are actually all great viable options. I've always really liked Wrath of the Berserker just because it gives you unstoppable, which makes it so if you are crowd control or anything, you can kind of just break it, and then you're kind of immune to it for a little bit. So it's really great for that. And then having extra movement speed is great. If you want to put another point into Supreme Wrath of Berserker, if you can get your cooldown up high enough, keeping up 100% uptime of Wrath of Berserker, if in theory it's possible, because Diablo 4 is not like Diablo 3 where we can have a lot of cooldown reduction, especially in the very beginning stages of the game. It can be difficult to get, but if you are able to keep it up, that would be fantastic, as it's just extra free stats. I mean, getting that extra 20% movement speed, extra fury generation, I mean, it's great. Unfortunately, it doesn't last very long though, because you only gain the Berserking and Unstoppable for 5 seconds, and then for the next 10 seconds, dealing direct damage with any of your basic skills, which is going to be Flay, you just grant yourself Berserking, so it's great for that. And then for the key passive, which is actually one of the best ones in the entire game, Unbridled Rage, makes it so your core skills will deal 135% increased damage, but they're going to be costing more fury. It's by far one of the best things in the entire game though. But in terms of the skill tree, I'll link it down below just in case I was too fast, but let's go ahead and go over briefly the gear. So once again, a quick little recap. All you need to do, get Combat Flay, and then you can put it into Whirlwind or Rend. You can put it into anything that you want, to be honest, but these are the ones that I recommend. The most important thing, again, because this is a Thorns build, you want to get this Outburst. It's the only thing that you really need to get, and then you could just start scaling life on almost all of your pieces of gear. Getting rubies is going to be excellent, and then from there, just get tough as nails and kind of flexible in terms of what you want to get. Now, again, the point of this video is mostly for people that are brand new to the game, or also wanting to maybe help their, duo partner that they are going to be able to have these shouts up so they can get extra regen and extra bonus stats. It's really easy to play. Again, very beginner friendly. And on top of that, let's go over the gear. Now, the only thing that I've put in here that may be a little bit difficult to get, especially in the very beginning because you can't even get uniques to drop, Razor Plate is one of the best things in the entire game for any Thorns build. It's just going to grant you a massive amount of Thorns. It is a unique item, so it's a little bit more rare. Again, you're going to need to get to a higher world tier that is available than what you can have at the start. But other than that, the rest of the gear is pretty easy to obtain. All these you can just get from aspects. So starting right off with Iron Blood aspect, you're going to be getting damage reduction for nearby bleeding enemies. If anything hits you, they're just going to be taking Thorns damage, which is going to apply bleed. So it's basically maximum uptime of 20% damage reduction. With Razor Plate, again, it's just a massive amount of Thorns damage. Next up, Needle Flare aspect is going to make it so Thorns has a chance to deal damage around you. If you can, ideally put this on a two-hander because it's going to be able to get more benefit. Because Barbarian actually can have two-handers and then they can have 2 one-handers. So depending on, what you have, you may want to go ahead and put it in a two-hander. And then aspect of Might over here, just basic skills grant you damage reduction, another 20% extra damage reduction. These are one of the best boots in the game, I would say, for most classes. It's basically like Firewalkers, but it applies a more damage, up to 10% more damage to chilled enemies, which you're going to be able to apply 100% of the time because you're melee, so it's just going to apply right in front of you. Next up, but this is another unique, so keep in mind, you're not going to get this till way later in the game because you can't even get uniques in the game in the very beginning. There are certain exceptions, I believe, like the Butcher's Cleaver and like some other ones, but for the most part, don't expect to get get these two uniques earlier on. Next up, we have gain Thorns while berserking, because you can apply your berserking with your shouts. So getting extra Thorns is the main goal of this build. And then next up, we have Aspect of Limitless Rage. It's going to make it so each point of fear you generate will make it so your next core skill deals increased damage. So this is where I prefer having Whirlwind, because Whirlwind, you push it once, you hold it, and it's going to get all of the benefit versus it just being activated and working off of one tick, because it's the next core skill, if that makes any sense. But again, you can use Ren if you want to. It's part of Bleed anyway, so it works. Next up, let me go ahead and move this over here so you guys can actually read it, because otherwise it'll get cut off. So we have Dust Devil's Aspect. So Whirlwind leaving a Dust Devil that deals additional damage. Again, applying as many ticks of Bleed is good. Mother's Embrace. This you'll be able to get real easy. Don't worry about how you're getting it. Just trust me, you'll get it. So Mother's Embrace makes it so if a core skill hits 5 or more enemies, which is your Whirlwind, you're going to be spinning, you get a bunch of your resource refunded. This one's super easy to get, don't worry about that. Next up, we have Aspect of the Expotent. So attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill. So this one over here is excellent. So again, depending on what you want to do with your build, this is basically stacking up. There's a lot of stacking that Barbarian can do, and that's why Barbarian is a really good class for dealing like big one-shots. But again, with this, it makes it much easier because you just activate Whirlwind and you'll have all of the double dipping of both of those abilities. And the next up, we have Aspect of the Berserking Ripping. So whenever you deal direct damage while you're berserking, you're going to be able to deal that base damage as additional bleed damage, because we're a bleed build. And then we have the Skull Breaker's Aspect. When you stun a bleeding enemy, it deals a % of their total bleeding amount to them as physical damage. Now this one, it's going to be something that where if you want to, you can hit a target with either there's like a kick move, or you can charge into them and that can apply a stun, but there are alternate ways to stun. I just wanted to go ahead and mention this one. Feel free to do what you want to, as you can run bash if you want to. There really wasn't an aspect that I felt like was a really good go-to to go ahead and mention, so I wanted to give this one a little shout out, but feel free for this last slot to run what you want to. As far as the gems go, you're actually going to be looking for damage over time, since we are mostly a bleed build. Thorns does not count as damage over time, just as a heads up. You can throw in Sapphires if you want to get extra crit damage, but I'm not even sure if you can even get a Thorns crit in the game. But there is something in Diablo 3 where it can scale Thorns, and there's other ways to scale it, even though it may not register. But I just went ahead and played safe and went with the Amethyst. But Sapphire arguably is one of the best in most builds, and the reason why is because it just does more crit damage. But we don't really have a good way to scale crit other than getting flat crit just up on the game. And in terms of a beginner build, you're not going to get crit like at all in the very beginning. Next up, we want as much maximum life as possible, so we want rubies in almost everything. More life equals more damage. And then for jewelry, this is across every single build. Put in skulls. Skulls are by far the best, unless you're really looking to do like a very specific boss and you want to like reduce damage over time. Skulls are way better, because how it works is armor actually reduces all of the damage that you take in the game. That's all elemental as well. So scaling armor is in your benefit. If you look at any of the top tier Diablo players, it's skulls in every single thing, unless you're doing something really weird for niche. And armor, it can be arguable that you can put in like some like lower damage over time, or if you're doing something very specific. But skulls, there's no question, it is the best to put in jewelry. In terms of our skills, you can see over in this one over here, we're playing with a few different skills. It's kind of up to you. You have to play with Flay though. You have to play with Flay, and then you just start scaling Thorns. So Challenging Shout and Flay are like the only real required ones, but to make it real easy and very beginner friendly, went ahead and throw in Rallying Cry, War Cry, just all of these shouts just to give your team as much benefit as possible, because again, the whole goal of this video was supposed to be for like newer players or someone that wants to duo with you and they're like, I don't know what to play. You just throw them this video, or just like kind of guide them along with this video and try to tell them what points to go ahead and put into. And again, everything will be linked down below. And then for the technique, which is like the Barbarian specialization, I like the one where 20% of our direct damage is actually inflicted as bleed. It's a bleed build, and at rank 10 you get increased bleeding damage for 5 seconds after killing a enemy. So bleed multiplier, and on top of that, getting that extra bleed. So you're going to be able to apply bleed very, very fast. Another thing I do want to mention, but this is making the build a little bit more complex. There is a really good skill called Rupture, which whatever they are having in terms of like their bleed, what you can do with it is it basically expends the bleed. So if they have bleed, like you'll start seeing their HP go down, but it'll be in like a darker red color. You'll start seeing it degen. Now what you can do with Rupture is it's going to apply all of that bleed damage that would have taken over time. It's just going to remove it completely, and it's going to deal all of that damage. It is actually really good, but I wanted this build to be as beginner friendly as possible, as in like you just walk up and take damage. It's way easier to do that than be like, okay, apply all these bleeds and then I want you to remove the bleed. It makes things a lot more complex. And so the reason why I wanted this build to be like super easy and the way I made it was that you could just pop your shots whenever you want to. Although I will say, if you really want to min-max, you can do Rupture, you can do builds where you're going to have 100% uptime, Berserking. These are way complex, and again, the whole idea of this whole build guide was supposed to be for beginner players. I will upload like the best builds, and while this build is very, very good, and especially for beginners, and on top of that, for your progression of doing the campaign, this is going to be an excellent build for a lot of players, as again, you are dealing a lot of your damage. You can see, I'm not even moving. Look at them. They're just eliminating themselves. Don't expect, though, just as a heads up, because I want to keep your expectations realistic, you can't just hold still on a boss and the boss will just eliminate themselves. Unless the boss actually has an AoE puddle, and if you can survive the damage, because you can actually gain fortification on taking damage, you may actually want to move out of the AoE. But if you stay in the AoE and it's a fast enough tick, and if there's overlapping ticks, as long as you can survive, you can actually melt bosses quite fast. So keep that in mind. Just as realistic expectations on bosses, you will need to kind of deal damage. You can go AFK and have your teammate kind of do most of it, but for the most part, the trash is so easy to clear up. It just clears up content super fast. But anyways, that's gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I do have one more build guide that I will be dropping very soon for beginner players. I want to drop 2 super easy beginner like videos for maybe you have a significant other that wants to play Diablo for the very first time, or someone wants to do couch co-op with you and they don't know too much about Diablo. I want to make 2 super easy builds, and then I'm gonna be dropping like some higher builds that are gonna be a lot more complex, but of course, you'll be able to get up to par with those. So if you do want to see more, hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and you'll definitely see more later down the line. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Check the pinned comment if you'd like to see more Diablo content. Peace.